5. Egypt would never again rule over other nations. Bible passage, Ezekiel 29:15. Written, between 593 to 571 BC. Fulfilled, 1967, etc. In Ezekiel 29:15, the prophet says that Egypt would recover from a desolation, perhaps Babylon's attack about 2,600 years ago, but that it would never again rule over other nations. Up until the time of Ezekiel, Egypt had been a world power for centuries, dominating many nations, including Israel. But for most of the past 2,500 years, Egypt has been controlled by foreign powers, including the Romans, Ottomans, and Europeans. Today, Egypt is an independent nation again. In 1948, 1967 and 1973, Egypt tried to dominate Israel but was unsuccessful each time, despite the fact that Egypt is 10 times larger than Israel. Since the time of Ezekiel, Egypt no longer rules over other nations. Here is Ezekiel 29:15. It will be the lowliest of kingdoms and will never again exalt itself above the other nations. I will make it so weak that it will never again rule over the nations. 6. Zechariah prophesied the Jews returned to Jerusalem. Bible passage, Zechariah 8:7-8. Written, between 520 and 518 BC. Fulfilled, 1967, etc. In Zechariah 8:7-8, the prophet said God would bring the Jews back from the east and the west to their homeland, Israel, and that they would be able to live in the city of Jerusalem again. This prophecy has been fulfilled more than once. About 2,600 years ago, Babylon destroyed Jerusalem and took many Jews as captives to Babylon. But many Jews later returned from Babylon. The Jews rebuilt Jerusalem, but the city was destroyed about 1900 years ago by the Romans. The Romans killed more than 1 million Jews and forced many more into exile. The Jews did not have control of Jerusalem again until 1967, when the Jews recaptured the city during the Six-Day War. Here is Zechariah 8:7-8. This is what the Lord Almighty says: I will save my people from the countries of the east and the west. I will bring them back to life in Jerusalem. They will be my people, and I will be faithful and righteous to them as their God. 7. Israel's deserts will become like the Garden of Eden. Bible passage, Isaiah 51:3. Written, perhaps between 701 to 681 BC. Fulfilled, being fulfilled now. In Isaiah 51:3, the prophet said that God will restore Israel and make it a paradise, like the Garden of Eden. This foreshadows what is currently happening in Israel. The Jews have been irrigating, cultivating and reconditioning the land during much of the 1900s. Many of the country's swamps, which had been infested with malaria, have been converted into farmland. And water from the Sea of Galilee has been channeled through portions of the deserts, allowing some of the deserts to bloom. Much work remains, but parts of Israel are blooming again. Although it was described as a wasteland as recently as the late 1800s, Israel is now a food source for many countries. And at least 200 million of trees have been planted there during the past century. Here is Isaiah 51:3. The Lord will surely comfort Zion and will look with compassion on all her ruins. He will make her deserts like Eden, her wastelands like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and the sound of singing. 8. Isaiah foretold of the worldwide return of Jews to Israel. Bible passage, Isaiah 43:5-6. Written, perhaps between 701 to 681 BC. Fulfilled, late 1900s. In Isaiah 43 5-6, the prophet Isaiah said that the Jews would return to their homeland from the east, the west, the north, and the south. Isaiah lived about 2,700 years ago. At that time, the Assyrians had forced many Jews in the northern kingdom of Israel into exile. Those Jews were taken to other areas in the Middle East. Then, about 1900 years ago, the Romans destroyed the city of Jerusalem and killed and exiled hundreds of thousands of Jews. Since then, the Jews have been scattered to virtually every country in the world. But, during the past century, millions of Jews have returned to Israel, from the east, the west, the north, and the south. From the east, many Jews living in the Middle East moved to Israel by the early 1900s. From the west, during mid-1900s, hundreds of thousands of Jews living in the West, Europe, and the United States began moving to Israel. From the north, the former Soviet Union, Russia, is north of Israel. It refused to allow its Jewish residents to move to Israel. But, after years of pressure from other countries, Russia finally began to allow Jews to return to Israel during the 1980s. So far, hundreds of thousands of Russian Jews have moved to Israel. From the south, Ethiopia, which is south of Israel, also refused to allow its Jews to return to Israel. But, in 1985, Israel struck a deal with Ethiopia's communist government to allow the Jews of Ethiopia to move to Israel. On the weekend of May 25, 1991, 14,500 Ethiopian Jews were airlifted to Israel. Isaiah's prophecy was also correct in saying that the north, Russia, and the south, Ethiopia, would have to be persuaded to give up their Jews. Many countries pressured Russia for years before it began to allow its Jews to leave. And Ethiopia had to be paid a ransom to allow its Jews to leave. Isaiah's prophecy was also correct in saying that the Jews would return from the ends of the earth, and Isaiah said that many centuries before the Jews had been scattered to the ends of the earth. During the past 100 years, Jews living as far east as China, as far west as the west coast of the United States, as far north as Scandinavia, and as far south as South Africa, have moved to Israel. Here is Isaiah 43 5-6. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bring your children from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up. And to the south, do not hold them back. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth.